There was a bizarre story in Russellville, Arkansas today. A man who reportedly quit his job over low pay went on a shooting spree with 2 handguns. Peter Van Zandt reports.
A man armed with 2 pistols this morning went on a shooting spree in 2 Arkansas towns, killing 7 people and wounding 4 others. Police say the suspect, Gene Simmons, had just quit his job this morning at a local convenience store in Russellville, Arkansas, and then began hunting down his victims.
It looks like he knew, or at least had contact with these people at various times.
Julie Money narrowly escaped death when the suspect started firing in her office building.
And the door flew open and the man shot him just point blank in the face, and then he turned and I screamed, and he turned and he shot at me, and it just went past my hair. I felt the heat from it, and I just dove and he took off.
Officials say Simmons barricaded himself for a time at a freight company, but then surrendered without firing on police. Several of the wounded remain hospitalized tonight, one with a gunshot to the head. Police say they haven't been able to establish a motive for the shootings, but they believe Simmons was targeting former employers. Tonight, police say Simmons is refusing to speak. Peter Van Zandt, CBS News, Atlanta.
Shock and horror mounted today as the death toll climbed following the murderous rampage of an Ozark mountain community. Officials counted 16 people dead, 14 of them members of the suspect's family. One of the victims was a young woman who reportedly spurned the alleged killer's advances. Peter Van Zandt now with today's developments.
Their worst fears came true. Searchers in the tiny Arkansas town of Dover this morning found the bodies of 9 missing members of the Gene Simmons family. 7 bodies were pulled from a freshly dug grave near the family house. 2 babies were found in garbage sacks in the trunks of these cars. But there's more. Last night, the bodies of 5 other family members who came home for the holidays were discovered throughout the house, making this killing ground the worst mass murder in Arkansas history.
We're talking about 14, 5 in the house that we found. I believe we've got 7 in the grave up here and 2 here in the cars.
The man suspected of killing all these people, Gene Simmons, is the same man who yesterday allegedly killed 2 more people and wounded 4 others in nearby Russellville, Arkansas. This morning, Simmons, who has refused to speak to police, was formally charged with 2 counts of murder.
I asked the judge to send him to the state hospital for psychiatric examination, which the judge did, and the judge didn't set a bond.
He's done nothing in his cell other than lie on the bunk with his face to the wall and just lie there.
Very little is known about Gene Simmons. Police say he didn't have a criminal record. Local residents describe him as a loner, a man who wouldn't allow his family to socialize with the outside world.
Never seen anyone like him, you know. I know about everybody in Polk County, and I ain't never seen anyone weird as he is.
You never did know them, you know. You couldn't get to know them. They was quiet people.
Quiet, withdrawn, words used to describe many of Simmons' 7 children, pictured here in their school yearbooks. Investigators believe Simmons murdered half of his family shortly before Christmas, killing the others as they entered his home for a holiday visit. Unopened presents were found in the house, as were the bloody signs of struggle. Tonight, shocked investigators have one major unanswered question.
Why?
Sure.
Why?
Gene Simmons may be the only man with the answer, and tonight he's not talking. Peter Van Zandt, CBS News, Dover, Arkansas.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News, Bruce Morton reports on
9 more bodies found this morning in Dover. The victims may be the wife, children, and grandchildren of the gunman. The toll now stands at 16 dead in an Arkansas murder case.
And now, Arkansas's own Eyewitness News at 6. With Roy Mitchell, Carolyn Long, Tom Bonner's weather, and Dave Woodman's sports, and the entire Eyewitness News team.
What happened in Pope County has stunned Arkansas and has rocked the nation. A mass murder of almost unbelievable proportions. 16 dead, including 14 who may be members of the same family. It all started yesterday with a shooting spree in Russellville that left 2 people dead and 4 people wounded. Then last night, police discovered 5 bodies inside a home in Dover. And today, the grisly recovery of 9 more bodies. We begin our coverage tonight with Stacey Allison in Dover.
Police lines went up just after daybreak this morning as deputies prepared to search for more bodies. They found nothing in the pond, but just a few feet away, someone spotted what looked like a grave. And 2 feet below the ground, a body.
Hold it. There it is.
Not one body, but 7, stacked one on top of the other. Police brought them out in body bags. They believe they are Simmons' wife, Becky, his son, Gene Simmons Jr. of El Paso, a grandchild, and 4 of Simmons' younger children still living at home. 17-year-old Loretta, 15-year-old Eddie, 10-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky. The sheriff was visibly shaken.
Emotionally, fellas, you never get used to it. You never get used to it. And I have a job to do, and I try to hold up and do that job.
Police believe those in the grave were killed first, possibly Wednesday or Thursday. Then the 5 in the house arrived from out of town. Police say they were probably killed immediately, and along with them, 2 grandchildren, each about 2 years old, found later today in the separate trunks of 2 cars at the house.
Few in this community knew what went on inside of this wall. Neighbors say Gene Simmons and his family lived here in virtual seclusion. So many are not surprised that 14 people could be murdered here Christmas week in secret.
But the killings didn't stop here at the secluded house. 2, Jim Chafin and Kathy Kendrick, were murdered publicly in Russellville on Monday morning, bringing the total number of bodies to 16. Julie Money says she missed Simmons' bullet during a Monday morning shooting spree.
I said when he looked at me with that gun and pointed that gun on me, he had this just horrid grin on his face. And he looked mad. He just looked mad, and like a mad dog would look at you.
A mad dog, a recluse, a weirdo, and a nice guy. All descriptions of this man. So far, Gene Simmons has said nothing to police, showed no emotion, except at the mention of family.
When they would mention where his family was at, how we could contact his family, and this kind of thing, the investigator said the only thing then that he saw was his bottom lip would quiver.
And the community is quivering too. Those who knew the family feel fear when they think of 16 murders in their small community and no motive.
It's right next door, just a couple houses down. And it was late before we ever got in bed. And I just lay there. I could see those kids' faces. It was scary.
Stacey Allison, Channel 4 Eyewitness News.
The Supreme Court has ruled that states may execute death row inmates who don't want to appeal their sentences. That decision means Ronald Gene Simmons can be put to death for killing 14 relatives and 2 acquaintances during a 1987 rampage in Arkansas. But the court's action does little to end the debate over the death penalty.
Their impatience now leads them to prefer finality of a death sentence to the point of an execution rather than appropriate safeguards and constitutional standards.
I'm pleased with the decision. I think it's important in the instance that it doesn't open the door for anyone who is opposed to the death penalty to challenge any death case just to delay or try to deny the process.
The court ruled that outsiders have no right to block an execution if the condemned person wants to die without an appeal.
December 22, 1987, Ronald Gene Simmons began a massacre that became known as the worst family murder case in Arkansas history and the worst crime involving one family in the history of the country. His rampage finally came to a halt December 28, 1987, with 14 of his immediate family members and 2 former co-workers dead and 4 others wounded. Just days before Christmas, 1987, after the little ones were off to school, Simmons drove into town and bought a .22 caliber handgun at the local Walmart. He came back home and shot his oldest son, Gene Jr., then his wife, Becky. After that, he strangled Gene Jr.'s 3-year-old daughter, Barbara. He left the bodies in the room and sat down to watch TV and to wait for the 4 youngest to arrive home from school. By 4 o'clock, Simmons could see his children coming up the hill. He greeted them outside with a smile and told them he had a surprise for each of them. He began with his oldest, Loretta. Simmons made the other three wait in the car outside, listening to Christmas carols. Simmons lured Loretta into his bedroom and locked the door behind her. He wrapped a nylon cord around her neck and held it tight until her body went limp. Next were Eddie, then Mary Ann, then little Becky. All were killed the same way. Afterwards, Simmons dumped all the bodies into the privy pit.
One of the deputies, he was a lieutenant at the time, Dillard Bradley, found a spot there that had been, it was obvious it had been freshly dug. It had been covered up with some scrap iron. And he moved that and found that had been freshly dug. We cordoned that area off and began digging. There was some barbed wire and there were some rocks and things like that on it. And so we had to kind of sort through that, and of course we thought very possibly it was a grave because we knew there were family members missing. Once we started digging down, then we found the first, hate to call it rose, but I guess you'd call it rose. The whole grave was probably, I'm going to say probably, I'm sure, I'm trying to go by memory now, but I'm going to say it was around 5 feet deep probably. And the bodies had been thrown in just on top of each other.
The older Simmons children came home on December 26th for the Christmas dinner he had promised with the extended family.
This was the first time ever that all of the family was going to be together. And I think we all felt like there was a concern that some of the family might be, including her, might be leaving after this gathering.
Simmons was waiting on them. The first to arrive home would be 23-year-old Billy, his 21-year-old wife, Renetta, and their 20-month-old son, Trey. Simmons met them at the door with his .22 pistol, shooting Billy and Renetta, then strangling Trey. Simmons covered their bodies with their own jackets and placed them on the dining room floor. The last to arrive was 24-year-old Sheila, her husband, 33-year-old Dennis McNulty, as well as 7-year-old Sylvia Gale, the daughter of Sheila and Simmons, and 21-month-old Michael, the son of Sheila and Dennis. One by one, he killed them in the same manner as he did the others. He laid Sheila's body on the dining room table, then covered her with a tablecloth. He wrapped the 2 babies in trash bags and placed them in the trunks of 2 old cars.
He had shot some people in Russellville. Some had died. Most had just been injured. He used a .22 pistol.
He first drove to the Peel and Eddy law firm, where he shot and killed his former co-worker, 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick. Next, Simmons continued to Taylor Oil Company, where he killed 33-year-old J.D. Chaffin and wounded another worker. After that, his next stop was at a Sinclair Mini-Mart, where Simmons quit his job just 2 days prior. There he shot and wounded 2 others. Simmons' last stop would be Woodline Motor Freight, where he would give himself up.
Whatever happened at the house, and then it just sort of appeared like, well, you know, he's done all of this, and he knew probably he would go to prison, and so he might as well just take care of any other issues that he had. And basically that's what he said when he was arrested, was he was through. I'm done.
Simmons was taken into custody and later charged with 16 counts of murder and sentenced to death.
Well, we was here at the sheriff's office, and we got a call, a shooting. First shooting was down at the attorney's office, where a secretary was killed, and then from there we had a shooting over here at the service station, which was right down here from the sheriff's office, where a lady was shot in the neck and another guy was shot at. And then from there we had another call back on the west side of town out at Taylor's oil distributor, where ex-fireman was, well, he wasn't ex-fireman, he was fireman, was working down there off duty and got shot and killed, and then Mr. Taylor was shot. And then his officers were responding out there, they was going back across town. And then the last time he was out here at a trucking company where he shot a lady out there, and that's where he was taken into custody. After Simmons was taken into custody, welfare check for his family because nobody had heard from him, in a few days. And that's when we proceeded out to his residence, which was out on Morgan Road out there.
So when all the shooting was going on, though, y'all didn't have a clue who was doing it or what was happening. Y'all were just boom, boom,
We
boom.
didn't at that time. We didn't know who had done it. Involved in the shooting. But we was getting calls that he was going from this side of town to the other side of town. And like I said, after he was taken into custody, we went to the residence to do a welfare check. When we got to the residence, there was vehicles parked in front of the yard, and the house was locked up. Had a big sliding door, you couldn't get in it. The curtains pulled. We found a window that was unlocked there at the kitchen, and that's why we was able to look in. When we looked in, we could see, bodies laying on the ground or on the floor that had been covered up. We made entry into the house for welfare check, where we found his daughter. She was there in front of the Christmas tree on the floor with a blanket over her. Her husband, his son-in-law, was at the front door. He was laying there dead and had a blanket over him. In the kitchen dining room area, there at the table, his daughter-in-law, she was laying against the wall on the floor. She was covered up with a blanket, and his son was laying by her on the floor with a blanket covering him. Their small baby, at that time we didn't know where it was. And then his daughter by his daughter, because he molested his daughter in Arizona, and she had a baby by him. And when we proceeded down the hallway in places, we found her in a bed, covered up. She had a yellow fish stringer around her neck, ligature, where she had been strangled to death. When we proceeded on down the hallway into the narrow hallway, in the bedroom, which was the master bedroom, there was blood all over the pillow and the sheets and stuff there in the bedroom, which was him and his wife's bedroom, and she was nowhere to be found. And then across the hallway, which was a real narrow hallway, there was another bedroom, and there was blood all over the bedding and stuff, and there was also blood splattered on the walls and the ceiling in that bedroom. We proceeded to, check things out, which, we had 2 infant babies missing at that time, plus his wife, his son, who was visiting from Arizona, and his other 4 children that was in school. During the process of searching, we were searching the pond and all the wooded areas around it. I believe it was Lieutenant Bradley at that time found a bunch of tin that was over the ground out there and rocks on top of it. And so we proceeded to pull it back, and you could tell it was fresh dug dirt. And we proceeded to dig into the pit, and we were running into barbed wire, rocks, and dirt, because he'd laid it with rocks.
Oh, wow.
Rocks and barbed wire all the way down. And when we finally got down deep enough, we discovered one of the bodies in the pit, which was one of his children. And he had poured some kind of a accelerant, either, I don't know where it was, wasn't gasoline or diesel. It was something, along that line, kerosene, I believe it was, that he had poured on top of the bodies in the grave before he covered them up. But we ended up down in the grave, pulling his wife and his son, oldest son from Arizona, plus his other 4 children out of the grave there, where he had put them. We recovered those bodies, and from what we could figure out during the crime scene and working it, he had sent his children 4 off to school, and his wife and his son from Arizona was there at the house. And from what we could figure, he'd walked back and his wife was still in bed, and he shot her in the side of the head. And that, like I said, right across the hallway was where his other son was from Arizona. And he shot him, but evidently it did not kill him, right off the bat, because there was a fight occurred, after he was shot.
Oh, wow.
And there was, marks on his head where he had been beaten, gashes, but there was blood, from the fight that was splashed up on the ceiling and on the walls in the bedroom. From what we could determine, after he'd killed both of them, he had took them out and put them in the pit out there, the hole that they had dug. And he waited on his children to come in from school, and he brought them in evidently one at a time and strangled them there. He used neckties and fish stringers and different things like that, and he strangled each one of his children. And then he'd put them in the pit out there and covered them up. He had waited at the house, and I don't know where a day or what, but his daughter-in-law and son arrived with their small infant child, and they were sitting at the kitchen table where she was shot. I think she was shot like 7 times, and then his son was also shot there. They was laying, like I said, on the floor in the kitchen dining room area against the wall, and he had covered them up with blankets and their small infant child. He'd strangled the baby, and he had 5-gallon there's more than 5 gallons. There's big trash cans full of water in the house. And from what we found out, that he had submerged the babies after he had strangled them down in the big tubs full of water. And at that time, they was the first one that that was killed like that. And then his daughter and his daughter by his daughter, which he had molested his daughter while he was in Arizona, and she had a baby by him. And their infant and his son-in-law came, and he shot his daughter there by the Christmas tree, and when she fell right by the Christmas tree in the living room, evidently he went over to the door, and his son-in-law come running in the door, and he shot him in the side of the head, and he fell right at the door there at the house. Then he strangled his granddaughter, or his daughter by his daughter at that time, and then he also strangled the infant baby and also submerged it. At that time, we had everybody accounted for except the 2 infant babies, and we had searched, and we went up out and behind the house in some old cars out there, and then we opened up the trunk, and inside the trunk we found a black trash bag that had been taped and pulled around, and opened it up, and there was one of the infant babies inside the trash can with a ligature around its neck where it had been strangled. And we opened up another car next to it, and inside the trunk of that car we also found trash bags that had wrapped up. And when we opened it up, it was also the other infant baby there at the house.
Wow. Now, when y'all arrested him and made contact with him, did he tell you any of this information, or y'all just went on there on a hunch on a welfare check and found everybody?
He never said a thing about the murder, even up to the day he was executed.
So y'all had no idea what you were walking into at the house. Now, how did y'all deduce who got killed in what order and all that good stuff?
Well, from what we could put together, you take, if his daughter and son-in-law would have been at the door, his son and daughter wouldn't have come in the house and sat at the table.
Yeah.
And, we knew the children came home from school, and, so we knew that happened, and it was a couple days later when his daughter and son and their families came in. So, you pretty well put a timeline together on the accounts that happened through what we was able to find out. And
now, did he use the same weapon throughout?
22 pistols.
Just kept reloading? And
right.
How many shots total? Did y'all ever come up with an amount?
Well, I think his daughter-in-law, she was shot like about 7 times, because you could tell she was against the wall and fighting as she was being shot, because blood was being slung everywhere, and she had it all over her where she was rubbing her face and stuff where she had been shot. And then his son there, I think he was shot 2 or 3 times. So, and then his daughter, I think I don't remember exactly how many times. She wasn't shot but a couple times, but his son-in-law, I think he was shot 1 time in the side of the head.
It's crazy the fact that he shot the older people and then strangled strangling somebody so personal. And to strangle a little baby, my gosh.
You take, he strangled his own daughter by his daughter, and then his two grandchildren, little, and then his own other kids, he strangled them.
Now, was there anything left in the house that kind of led up to why he did it, or a note, or anything?
The only thing that we was able to determine, her sister, she was...
His wife's sister?
No, his wife's sister, yes.
Mm.
She lived over in, I don't remember, over in the eastern part of the United States, and from what we was able to find out, she was fixing to leave him. It was an abusive, relationship kind of, and I think she was going to take the children and go over there.
So it could be he found out?
Yes, according to a letter, that we received, that was sent to his, to her sister.
Mm.
But he never did admit to nothing, as far as...
So once he killed all of them, he just decided, well, I'm headed to town to right some wrongs that went on at my jobs.
He stayed there for a couple of days at the house after he killed everybody with them in the floor and all of that. He was there a couple of days before he come to Russellville and done this.
Yeah, that's just crazy, man. So when he came to Russellville, was that still the same gun?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
so he had ammo and everything on him?
Yeah, that was the same. Well, yeah, I assume because he had more than one gun, but 22 was what was used here in town, and also a 22 was what was used up there.
And he just surrendered, right?
Well, at first, after he shot him, he kind of barricaded himself in out there at the trucking place, and finally, he gave up.
Mm.
Because there was so many officers out there at the time, because, like I said, it's going back across town because we was getting a call. The first shooting down there by the Forestry Service at the lawyer's office, where the secretary was killed. And then the next shooting was, right out here past the sheriff's office on East Main. And then the next shooting was all the way back on the west side of town at Taylor's oil deal. And then the next shooting was all the way back out here on the east side of town. So he was driving back across town, when the officers were going one way, he was going the other way.
So what was with the secretary at the lawyer? What was his beef with her?
I don't know exactly what the beef was. It was something over papers or something. He was kind of infatuated with some of the women that,
That was the Kendrick woman, right?
Right?
He made advances to her or something at one point? Yeah, that is just a strange case. So when y'all went out there and when you take a body to the coroner, they've got a lot to do. But when you've got that many bodies, did y'all have coroners come in from other areas, or was that coroner just
they was
taking over everything?
No, the coroner, our coroner here, and then they was all transported to, the Little Rock State Crime Lab, where autopsies and everything was done at Little Rock. But at the time, it may have changed now, but at the time when this happened, it was the worst family massacre in the nation's history.
I think it still is.
It's a good chance it probably still is. But.
So other agencies, I'm assuming, came in and helped?
Well, mostly it was just the sheriff's office. The state police helped on it. State police was up there helping us on it. The investigator that was here. But, the city... all of these shootings took place inside the Russellville city limits.
So that went to them.
So the city worked that part of it as far as the shootings, because we concentrated on the, crime scene and everything that we had out in the county.
Yeah.
And so the city of Russellville, their detectives and that worked the, shootings and the murders inside the city.
So once he got arrested, now he just waived all of his rights, right? He just wanted to be executed immediately, kind of thing.
He wanted that, but several other inmates on death row down there filed appeals on his behalf. With he didn't want it. He wanted to be executed immediately, but they filed appeals down there to try to stop his execution because they was on death row. So they figured,
if you've done all that and you just want to immediately get it, why not just kill yourself? Why not suicide by cop? It's strange that he did all that and then he wanted to be arrested. He wanted to go to jail and he wanted to be executed.
That really surprised me because I figured, he'd want to be.
Yeah, just end
killed.
This is why I did this and now I'm killing myself and blah, blah.
But, he never did it. He never did admit to anything.
So how long was he in jail before he got executed? What, like 4
2 years?
2 years?
I think it's like 2 years he was on death row before he was executed, something like that.
Now, when the court stuff all went on, were they calling you back as a witness? Did did they have to do all that, or?
No, no. Once we had our trial, see, they had a change of venue on the trial. They didn't try it here in Polk County. The trial was held in Johnson County.
Interesting.
Yeah, they had a change of venue, and the trial was held at like I said, at Johnson County Courthouse is where the trial was held.
Is that because the Polk County affiliation? They just thought.
Well, yeah. See, Polk, Johnson, Polk, Johnson, and Franklin counties all in the same district. So the change of venue went to Johnson County because they figured it'd be so prejudiced in Polk County for what would be done because inside the city and then out in the county, that they couldn't get a fair jury because of everything that happened. So that's the reason they had a change of venue and went to Johnson County.
So what happened after, like, the house? So once everything was done, I mean, did you guys board up the house?
No, we after we took all of our evidence and and stuff from the house, all of that. Of course, his attorneys that he had then, they got everything that was up there that was worth anything for his fees and stuff. And then finally, over the years after it happened, there wasn't nobody there, and kids was going up there and going in the house, and it finally ended up, it finally ended up burnt up there.
Probably best.
Oh yes.
Yeah. So that was 35 years ago, man, and you're still getting asked questions about it. I mean, how did it affect you? Because you were the guy that walked in the door, right?
Yeah.
Weren't you filming it? Your
camcorder? I had somebody
it?
else filming it.
Okay. And you were narrating?
I was narrating it, doing through the crime scene.
So I mean, that's got to be seeing the dead kids and the family members.
Children. In my 39 years of working in law enforcement, children always bothered me more than anything else because. I mean, you cannot be cold-hearted, but let me tell you, if you are working law enforcement and you take that stuff home with you, you will go crazy. You have to, when you walk out of the office, you try to go do something, get it out of your mind. That's the reason so many officers and that drink and all of that stuff. But me, I just went home, went to work, and done, get it off your mind.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it'll drive you crazy.
Do you think it's ever going to go away for you? I mean, people are always having you do interviews and asking you questions and stuff. And
in 39 years, I don't know how many murder cases and stuff that I worked. Had one case when I started in 1970. In 71, we had 3 little girls here. They come up missing. I worked on that case for probably 35, 36 years before we ended up solving it.
Wow.
And found 2 of the skeleton remains and was able to identify 2 of them. The other one, anyway, the guy, he finally confessed to us after 30-something, well, it's like 20-something years, nearly 30. And anyway, he's done life and 3 life sentences in the penitentiary plus 1 out of Missouri.
My goodness.
I worked on that case for years too. I mean, there's a lot of cases, murder cases and stuff that I worked on. Well, I worked everything because I was head of the criminal investigation division for 30-something years.
Nothing like this one, though, huh?
Oh no, this one was something else.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I appreciate you telling. I mean, I've heard about it. I mean, I just graduated high school when it happened, so I was just a kid, and I don't even, when you're a kid, you just don't think about stuff like that. But just over the years, it kept, you kept seeing stuff and seeing stuff and seeing stuff, and I thought, man, I would love to get to know the guy that was actually there, that walked through the door and was on scene, because everybody hears about the guy and the kids and everything else, but nobody ever really kind of got your perspective or in detailed.
Well, I done I guess it's about 6 years ago, I guess it was. I done a documentary, hour-long documentary with Oxygen Channel on it. And about every Christmas they air it, because they do all their murders at Christmas now, on that Christmas homicide. So it's probably airing now. I don't know, off and on through now to Christmas.
Yeah.
I've done that one back. That's been about 5 years ago, the last one I've done.
Yeah, this is the 35-year anniversary, man. It's just...
Don't seem like it's been that long.
I was going to ask you, does it seem like it's been 35 years?
No, it don't seem like it's been that long.
Well, Ray, I appreciate you sitting down with me and talking with me and all that good stuff. I appreciate you coming in and getting your perspective on everything.
1987. It was a long Christmas weekend. I want to illustrate something to you about what happened that day on Monday. It started out like any other Monday. It was the day after the holiday. It was kind of gloomy, gray day. Everybody's trying to get back to work because Christmas, I believe, was on Friday. So they had the weekend, they had the long holiday. And Monday, it's like any other day for us. Something we'd not had was we got a shots fired call. We had a shooting at a law office in Russellville. The first call we got was at the Peel Law Firm, which was set right here. When we got there originally, we knew that there had been a shooting. We really didn't know what, because the call had come in from the law firm. A receptionist sitting at the front desk, Kathy Kendry. She was our first homicide for that day in Russellville. Kathy was the receptionist at the desk. Gene walked into that office, shot her point blank behind her desk, and left. Ironic, at that time, there was an attorney in that law office, but he was in court. I think if he had been there that day, things would have changed a little bit. He's now our prosecutor. He was a partner. His name was David Gibbons. David was a U.S. military. He was a medic, and he was also an attorney. And he was with Peel in that law firm at the time. David's office was in the back, and probably, had he been there, he could have probably stopped Gene then. David carried a 1911 45 in his desk. David was in court, so he wasn't able to do anything. When we got the call, we were trying to figure out who this suspect was and what they were driving. It was real sketchy. They just saw him walk back outside and he left. Described as an older male, wearing a hat, really nothing else. I rolled up to this scene. At that time, head of detective was Lloyd Hartzell. He was a sergeant. He said he would take that crime scene. When he pulled up there, we got a second call of a second shooting. And this was way out on West Main. You know where that's at? There's a Sonic and a PDQ. And there used to be a little change loop place. Right behind it was the Taylor Oil Company. The oil company was right off Cumberland. Took off and went down West Main Street. At that time, after the second shooting that we had, we got a physical description of the car. I'm doing 90 nothing, but I was in an unmarked car. As a detective, I had an unmarked car, but I had a police package, but I had an unmarked car. I'm going that way looking for, as they tried to describe to me, a small vehicle, looked like a little station wagon. They described basically the same guy. Well, we couldn't figure out how he got from here to here. What we determined later through our investigation is he went down Glenwood so he could not be detected. He went down Glenwood, went over to Inglewood, 12th Street. He took 12th Street, went west, continued west to Inglewood Street, which makes a curve and comes around and connects back out on Main Street. He makes this long journey around and comes here to the bulk plant. The reason why he went to the bulk plant, one of the people who wronged him in this whole situation. The guy that was shot here, one of them here, there was two people shot. One of them was a fatal. There was a third person shot at. This bulk plant had a dock on it. Gene went into that bulk plant and shot Rusty Taylor. Rusty was the owner of the Taylor Oil Company. He was also owner of a convenience store that was out here on East Main. He went inside the office. Rusty was behind his desk talking to another customer, Craig Bailey. Craig's good friend of Rusty, but he was there visiting with him. Gene walked into the front office. He had to go into a second office. The little office was kind of squared off. The bulk plant was over here on this side, and what they had over there were barrels of oil. He walked in the door. Rusty was behind his desk talking to Craig, basically in this angle, like me facing the instructor here, Mr. Harris. Gene steps in with his .22. He fires at Rusty. Rusty gets hit. He drops under his desk. He does not see Craig Bailey sitting over against the wall. Craig was just sitting against the wall in a chair talking to Rusty. As Gene was turned around to walk out, we had a second fatality. J.D. Chapman. Chapman was a firefighter for the Russell Police Department. J.D., who I knew very well, was a close friend, that was his day off. Firefighters have a 24 on, 48 off. He worked for Taylor, driving a bulk truck, delivering gas. Whoa. JD had just returned from a fire call. He got a call to respond to a fire. I don't remember where the fire was at. When he come back, when he walked into the office from out on the bulk side of it, out of the warehouse, he grabbed the door handle. JD grabbed the doorknob and he pulled the door open. He met Ronald Gene Simmons. RG just turned around and fired one round. 22 round went right here by JD's nose below his eye. Stopped him instantly. When JD fell backwards, his hand was still, because of the motor reflex, his hand, and this is something you'll learn sometime when you do these crime scenes, his hand was in the motion of the last thing he'd done before he died. He grabbed that doorknob and was going to step in the office. He had no clue what was going on. But when he opened up the door, RG just turned around, shot him, and then he went out the door through the warehouse and was going off the dock to leave. The clerk, she was in a bathroom on the far side of the warehouse and had just come out of the bathroom. He saw her. She saw him. He fired rounds at her. She ducked behind the barrels of oil, and then he took off. She was the closest thing we had at that time to a real good witness of what happened. I responded to this crime scene. We had, and for that day, guys, I think for about a 2-hour period, there was nothing but the sound of sirens. Sirens everywhere. We were flying by the seat of our pants. We've had 2 shootings right here inside town. Everybody, the guys from the sheriff's office, when they heard the call, everybody was going anywhere they needed to be to try to help. We had a little bit of chaos. I picked up this witness, taking her to the office so we could get her interviewed. As I was getting back to the office, no sooner than I pulled up to the office to drop her off, I was going to do a formal interview with her and try to get some more information about my suspect and what he looked like. Just as I was dropping her off at the PD, got her out the front door, she was going in, we had a third shooting. The third shooting occurred at Sailor's convenience store. Think of a landmark now on East Main Street. There's a Dollar General and a Whitson Morgan used car lot across from Walmart. Approximately in between those two, that's where the convenience store was at. The reason R.G. went to that convenience store is that's where he used to work as a nighttime clerk. He went inside there and was going to shoot the day clerk. The day clerk picked up a chair and trying to throw it at R.G. He then started picking up cans of something off the shelf, beans, whatever, started chunking them in R.G. We had the chair. He fired around and the chair deflected the bullet wound, but Sailor was injured. They were not life-threatening, but had been shot by a .22. If you've ever been shot by a .22, it don't care how big a bullet it is. It hurts because it's hot, and where he got shot at, it's enough to make you think you're going to die. At that time, we had 2 active crime scenes going on over here. We had ambulances running in all different directions to try to pick up the one. We had a fatal over here, but we had another one that shot at, which was Rusty Taylor, who was the guy who owned this service station here. As we're coming to this crime scene, now that I'm headed back to here because we've got an officer, Alan Bradley was taking care of this crime scene, I started heading to the convenience store. No sooner than I got there, Jay Winters. Jay was the administrator for the jail at that time before he became sheriff. But Jay took over that crime scene for me. And the reason why, no sooner than Jay got there to take care of it, Firestone. Right behind Firestone, back here off of Bernard Way, is a trucking firm. Woodline Motor Freight. R. Gene Simmons used to work at Woodline Motor Freight. The problem with R. Gene at that time, and what we learned later, he had a female for a supervisor. In his life of control, females were not to be boss of him. He couldn't stand it that this lady, Miss Butts, was his supervisor. He didn't get along well. He was a very controlling person. He did it with his family. Y'all read some of the stuff, I'm sure, in that, and probably heard a few stories. I'd just like to tell you that some of the stuff you read in some of the on Facebook or in when you're trying to look it up on Google, use a lot of that stuff with a grain of salt, because a lot of it, there was a book written about all this called Zero to the Bone. I'm standing here telling you I would not recommend that book. You can get it and read it, but it's a fairy tale. Those guys wrote that book to get it out right quick because of R. Gene Simmons being captured. wrote about what it was in his mind and why he did some of the things he did. Guys, I'm here to tell you, when myself and Captain Caldwell, when we had the opportunity to be around Ronald Gene Simmons, he wasn't going to tell us anything about who, what, or where, or what he done with his family. And we were working to try to figure this out after over here. This ended up being my crime scene of working as a Woodline motor freight. He had shot Miss Butts, who was his supervisor, shot her there at her desk, and then went into a back room. There was a lady who was back in the back and got on the phone and called our office. Back then, we dispatched our officers from the PD. The sheriff's office dispatched their own, so we had 2 dispatch centers. But R. Gene Simmons went in that back room and told her to call the Russell Police Department. He was going to turn himself in. And he had his .22 pistol with him, or revolver that he had with him. When we arrived on the crime scene here off the back dock, we went in there, myself, Chief Johnson, and there was a trooper at the time, Jerry Roberts. Jerry was just about ready to shoot R. Gene Simmons through a plexiglass. He saw Gene in a back room. He had the girl on the phone, and he had the gun pointed at her. And our thought, mine was, he's going to do something. He was wanting to give up, but we've gotten that relayed to us about what he was trying to do. Then, before he would give up, he wanted to know what the chief was wearing, because that's who he turned himself into. Luckily, the radio operator working that day, Donna, she knew what the chief wore that day. Our police chief described him, gray hair, a white-haired gentleman wearing a blue sweater. I can remember that, a blue sweater and a white shirt. He turned himself into RG, to the chief, handed him the gun. We took him into custody, took him to the PD. He gave us a bogus name. We couldn't find him in the system back then. He wouldn't say nothing more. When we ran the tag on his little station wagon that was parked there at the Woodline Motor Freight, we then found it returned to the Ronald Gene Simmons in Dover, an address in Dover, Mockingbird Lane, I think, up off of Broomfield. Thank you, Broomfield Road. Okay, so now we've got a fatal here. We have a fatal here. We've got a near fatal here. We wasn't sure that Miss Butts was going to make it. She survived. She died here just a few years ago, but she had brain damage because he shot her in the head. We found that he was finding that 22 just wasn't quite doing what he thought it was supposed to with the rounds and the way he was firing. The autopsies that were done describe each individual here about how many times R. Gene had to shoot him. He had 2 22s he was using. He had made a mention that it wasn't what he thought it was going to do, and some people he shot more than once, some people he shot 5 or 6 times. After all this, we've got R. Gene Simmons back at the RPD. We're trying to find out who he is. He wouldn't talk to us. He wouldn't tell us nothing. We interviewed him at great length, trying to get something from him to find out what was going on, trying to figure out, one, why all these particular people. Later on, we understood why, and what I was telling you was what we learned from the shooting, why these particular people were pointed out by him. We got him over to the sheriff's office then to process him and try to further interview him. And it was there then that we discovered we might need to go up to his home in Dover and check on his family. Because this was Monday now, school's back open, and we had noticed too that the kids did not come back to school. That was a little concerning. I then, after we left here, I went then with another detective myself. We went with the sheriff's office because we went over to the sheriff's office with them to try to figure out what was going on and this guy and why and what and where. After that, this is when we discovered we wanted to go over to his home place and kind of check on his family.
I'm Captain Caldwell Lewis. I started in law enforcement in 1970. I retired in 2009, so that tells you about how long I was in law enforcement. At the time that this occurred, I was lieutenant and the head of the criminal investigation division with Polk County Sheriff's Office. As Scotty said, we was running like a bunch of bees in a beehive all over the city of Russellville at that time. After he was taken into custody, and we determined through talking to the school that his children hadn't come to school, so we went to the residence for a welfare check. When we got to the residence off Broomfield Road, the house sitting up on a hill on the north side, we got to the house, nobody answered, vehicles all over the yard. We got to running license plates, numbers of the vehicles, trying to find out who was there. There was a window open on the south side leading into the living room area. Raised the window up, it was unlocked, pulled the curtain back, we could see bodies in the house. We went into the residence to check it. There was a male laying just inside the living room, or in the living room, just inside the door. It's a sliding door, and he put a broom handle inside the door so it couldn't be opened. There was a white female laying at a Christmas tree, had blankets over her. There was a white female in the kitchen laid up against the wall with a blanket over her. There was a white male in the kitchen laid up in the floor with a blanket on it, and there was a small child in a bedroom covered up with a blanket who had a ligature, a fishing cord tied around her neck where she had been strangled. We'd done a crime scene search of the whole thing. From what we could determine on this, they had came in for Christmas. We still had 9 people that was unaccounted for. His 4 children that had been to school, his son, his wife, plus 2 small babies, plus another little boy that was his son, his grandson. So during the process of doing the investigation, there was holes knocked in the wall, there was cabinets torn off inside the house where it was tore up. From what we can determine, that his daughter, or his son-in-law and his daughter came there, and as they came into the house, they had a small child, a little baby. They was in the kitchen area. He shot them. He shot his daughter, daughter-in-law, I think 8 times in the face. She was against the wall and she was fighting. There was blood all over her hands and her face and her clothes and everything where she was fighting, trying to stay alive. He shot his son there 3 times, I think, or 2 in the head and the chest. They was laying there. He covered them up. They had a small baby. He strangled the baby and put it, they had trash cans inside the house full of water. He submerged the babies in the water and drowned them, okay? I think the baby was like 20 months old, 21, something like that, 22 months old. He stayed there at the house. Well, his daughter, his son-in-law, their small baby, which was 20 or 21 months old, plus his daughter by his daughter, because he had sexually molested his daughter and had a daughter by her. This happened in Arizona, and the child welfare had got after him and was doing a case, so they moved him there to keep him from being arrested. So they moved to here. So when they came into the house, his son-in-law was still outside. He shot his daughter in the face at the Christmas tree. She fell right in front of the Christmas tree. His son-in-law come running into the door. When he did, he had stepped behind the door. When he come in, he shot him right in the side of the head and killed him. He hit the floor. He then strangled his daughters by his daughter, and then her small baby, he drowned him, or her, I don't remember, I think it's him. We accounted for these people that said we still had 9 people we was unaccounted for. So we had to come back, we obtained a search warrant, went back to the residence. We didn't know where they was in a pond. We had teams that was searching the fields and stuff around there, teams that was dragging the pond and that. So as we was searching for the area there, outside, inside the house, down the hallway there, the master bedroom where Argene and his wife had stayed, across from it was another bedroom. Well, in this bedroom, in the bed, there was blood all over the bed. And in the bedroom on the south side, there was blood on the blood, and there was splatters all over the wall, the ceiling, and all over the room. Well, what we've come to find out, he had walked down the hallway that morning after his children had went to school. He had killed his wife, shot her in the head. He turned around and shot his son that was in the other room. Then he turned around. His son, he didn't kill him instantly. He started fighting. He beat him with a piece of pipe there, and that's the reason the blood splatters was all over the wall and the ceiling and everything, and it was all over the room. After he killed him, he then strangled his small grandson by his son there. He took them out. There was a hole dug in the ground out there that we found during the time of the crime scene search there. That's where he ended up putting them down. He stayed in the house then. Now, you got to remember, this happened before he killed his 2 grandchildren, his daughter, his son-in-law, and all of them at Christmas. This happened prior. He waited on his children to come in from school. He kept them outside. He called them in one at a time into the room, and he strangled them with ligatures. He used cords, necktie, and different things, strangled each one of them there. He called one of them in, and he strangled them. He killed all 4 of them. After he killed them, he took them out to this hole that was in the ground that they had dug. He threw them in the hole, He poured kerosene in on top of them. He put dirt, rocks, barbed wire, more dirt, rocks, and barbed wire all through this, and then the top he took and put tin over the top of it. Well, during the crime scene search of this place, we discovered the grave. Lieutenant Bradley at that time, which he was a captain, or major when he retired from the sheriff's office, he found it, he contacted us, and we went outside, started digging through the grave. As we dug down into it, you could tell it was a fresh grave because about 2 foot down inside the hole, there was moss growing on the side of the dirt, which the moss is not going to be growing 2 foot under the ground like that. So we knew it was a fresh grave. And you could smell the kerosene. We had to use a winch on the truck to pull the barbed wire and stuff out so we could get to it. We got down into the hole, and this is where the bodies was laying in there. All of them was laying on top of them. We still had 2 children that we did not account for, the 2 small babies then. We went to searching. There were some old cars down there, and I said, we need to search the old cars. We ended up having to punch the trunks. Well, when we punched the trunks of the cars, raised the trunk up, and inside the back of the car, there was a garbage bags there. I opened the garbage bag because it was taped up, and there was one of the small infants inside it. We popped the trunk on the other one, same thing. Inside a black garbage bag wrapped up, tape, was this other small child in there. So at that time, from the start of it, he had killed his son, his wife, and his grandson at home that morning. He took them out and threw them in the ground. Then when his children come in from school, he killed them, threw them in the hole, covered them up. He sat there at the house for a couple days until his daughter-in-law and son came. Then he killed them, and then when his daughter, son-in-law, daughter by him, and the other grandbaby came, he killed them. He stayed there a couple more days, and that's when he come to Russellville and started his shooting spree in Russellville. So he had stayed there, and from what we can determine from things, he was very dominant. I'm telling you, you don't know. The Christmas presents was still in the house, in the closet, and stuff like that. Through the letter, his wife was going to leave him, through what we read in the letters and stuff. And he could not stand that. He loved his daughter, to the point, and he could not see any of them leaving. He went ballistic when she got married because he wanted to marry her and keep her there himself for his second wife. So he could not stand this, and I think that's what really touched him off when his wife was going to leave him, and I think that's when he went on a killing spree. He wasn't going to let them leave or nothing else, and he decided to kill all of them. And that was pretty well a synopsis. Y'all have read or looked at it now. That's pretty well what happened through the whole thing. He wanted to die, and then he stayed on death row 2 years before he finally died. If the kids hadn't showed up for school, a couple days, they would have probably been doing a welfare check. They would have been contacting somebody, what's going on, and there would have been somebody going to the house.
They did have a detective who went up to the house the first time to try to see if he could get a hold of anybody. He could get no answers there, but talked about all the different vehicles that were in the yard that were not related to the daughter, the incestuous daughter he had a relationship and child by. She was married and now lived down in South Arkansas. That car was there, a couple other vehicles there, but they weren't tied to the house. So that raised a little question, but we couldn't get anybody, like I said, couldn't get anybody to come to the door. There was no answer. So that's the other thing it kind of started is that, one, they didn't show up for school, those 4 kids, and the teachers were concerned that they hadn't been to school. That would given us as information, so we developed that, plus what had happened in town, and not being able to contact anybody. And we didn't have the luxury that you kids have now. Everybody's got a cell phone. We didn't have cell phones. You ever heard of payphone? That's bulk what we had. Payphone on every corner. You go to the phone and call somebody. You didn't have the instantaneous contact that we have now. And by the kids not coming to school, we called the home number. They actually had home phones in, the number at home. Couldn't get a hold of no one. She was working, mother was trying to get a job. Like I said, RG was very controlling. He controlled that family and everything they did. The next oldest daughter that lived there that was still going to school, she was a spitting image of her mother. But we I think in some of the things we saw in the letters, the next one he was going to probably try to have some kind of relationship with was going to be her. She was a junior?
I think she was a
junior at school at Dover. Pretty girl. Looked just like her mother. And of course, RG had a controlling thing over his wife. And she tried to protect the kids. She in fact even wrote a letter, like Captain referred to. There was a letter we found where she talked about she getting ready to leave.
She had wrote that to her sister. But I mean, he was so dominant. I mean, they couldn't do anything. I mean, you got to understand that. I mean, it was just strictly he had his thumb on it, and that's the reason he couldn't stand the thought of they was going to leave. And that's the reason I think what set him off on that. And after he'd done that and stayed there a couple of days after he killed his entire family, he decided to go to Russellville and take revenge on the people he thought had done him wrong in Russellville.
The Kathy Kendrick, who I knew personally, I grew up with her. She was a part of my family when we moved here in Russellville back in 1963. Her father, her mother, and her brother, her sisters lived with us. I personally knew Kathy, knew that she grew up, and then now was working. She had a child. Kathy was working at a place where RG had seen her. He had an infatuation with her. He had his eyes on Kathy. We had got a couple of calls where he showed up where she was living in the University Estates. He would leave flowers on her doorstep. She'd come out, open the door, go to work, and there's these flowers laying there. He'd leave her cards. He got to where he was just constantly after Kathy. She spurned him, didn't want to have anything to do with him. That upset him. He had no control over her. That was another thing. He was losing control. And when Kathy spurned him, she called us a couple of times. We had complaints on RG where he would come to her house, she'd come out the door, and he'd be standing there. If he wasn't leaving flowers, he was standing there, bothering her. He tracked her down to figure out where she was now working. She had just started at the law firm as a receptionist at the front desk. That was the first person he went after, the one that had spurned him. Of course, like Captain said, he stayed up there with those bodies and his family for those couple of days in that house. And you could see some of the rage. When I went inside there, we boosted up the sheriff and put him in the window of that house to go look and open up that door so we could get inside. When we got inside there, you could tell he was just kind of doing a little survivalist. When he'd eat a meal, he'd put it in a bread bag, tighten a knot, and leave it. He was doing that so that if critters got inside the house, they wouldn't smell things and start trying to get in there. The one window was open, we was able to get into, but the rest of it, he beat the cabinet doors off the kitchen. He punched holes in the ceiling, wherever it was crowbar. You could tell he was thinking about things as the time was going on, and stayed there in that house. No heat of any kind. It was kind of rural. He had big old blue 55-gallon barrels that they had scattered through the house for water. That's what they did for water. He made those kids, because they did not have running water, they had a privy, as we call it. Looked that up, it's called an outhouse. Outside, they had no inside plumbing. They would have to go out there. He made those kids dig a little tree, and they was going to set the house on top of it. That was the thought that they were doing this work for. When they got home from school, they didn't have a cell phone to get on and Google or do anything. They had their homework to do, and then he had an assignment. They was out there digging that latrine. They dug it about 4 foot deep. Rock. Those kids were out there pick and shovel, digging their own grave, and they didn't realize it.
You know, he stayed there for 3 days at least from the time that he killed his family, and then he waited on the rest of his family before he killed them, and then he stayed there another day or two before he came to Russellville. During all this time, he's at this house, so who knows what's going through his mind. When he went to trial, he wanted the death penalty. He wanted to die. That was his goal. He wanted to die. Really, I think he wanted to be shot, but I think he decided to give himself up. And then, but the 22, when you do look at the autopsy reports, you're going to find some of them that he shot 5 and 6 times. I think the one he may have shot 8 times. I know his son, son-in-law shot him once in the head because he dropped this as he come through the door. The daughter, I think he shot her 2 or 3 times, and then the son, he shot him 2 or 3 times. But all the other children and stuff, as far as his children, and he strangled all of them to death.
And like I told you earlier, the people in Russellville, the only one that had nothing to do with R. Gene Simmons at all and his problems was that fireman. J.D. Chaffin was collateral damage.
Wrong place, wrong man.
J.D. walked in that door after R.G. shot Rusty Taylor in his office. And when Chaffin grabbed that doorknob to step inside, he had no idea what he was walking into. When he opened up that door, that was a threat to him, so he shot J.D. J.D. had nothing to do with R. Gene and all his other problems. He shot Rusty because that was his boss, where he worked as not as a clerk at that little convenience store in town. He shot Joyce Butts because when he worked there at Woodline Motor Freight, he was an exemplary employee, but he could not stand. He was a sergeant, master sergeant in the Air Force. He was used to being in a little bit of control. And once he got into the civilian world, he lost that, and the only way he could be in control was through his family. And when he worked for Joyce Butts, she was over him. And he had issues with Joyce. That's why he shot her. The guy at the convenience store, that was the guy that was working the shift that R. Gene really wanted, but he didn't get it. This guy took it out on him. Like I said, the only of the four there in Russellville, the only one that had nothing to do with this whole thing was the fireman. He just happened to be at the right place at the wrong time. And to that day, he's buried in a pauper grave in Lincoln County, right across from the penitentiary. If you've got driving down Highway 65, owned by the penitentiary, before you get to the penitentiary, right there on the right, for the life of me, I cannot remember the name of the little cemetery, but it's there in Lincoln County. That's where they bury the paupers, ones who don't make claims.
In Russellville, I was at the office working, like I said, in criminal investigation, and me and my investigators were there. And we got the call. Well, the first call come in on shooting. Well, it doesn't matter where it's in the city, the county, or what. We all went to respond. Well, we started responding. The next thing another one, the next thing another one, and the next thing another one. We ended up with 4 shootings, in Russellville, and officers going every direction. And then, like I said, then it leads up to what we had up there. At the time, and it still may be, this was the worst family massacre in the nation's history. And it may still be.
With a single family?
Yeah, the same history. We had every news media you could think of across the United States.
In the world.
Yeah, they was everywhere from here on this thing. But like I said, it was the worst family mass murder.
A suggestion too, for y'all to get on Amazon. There's a book written by a good friend of mine, Jim Moore. Jim used to work for one of the radio stations here, back years ago. But Jim wrote a book called Rampage. If you get an opportunity to find it on Amazon, look it up. Jim took Sheriff's Office case files, he took the RPD case files that we had, and he wrote a book about it. That is the closest to reality about what happened. It's only like a 260-page book. Good book to read.
I worked law enforcement, like I said, from 1970 to 2009. I don't know how many homicide cases I worked. You never get used to it. It didn't bother me as bad with adults, but when you go seeing small children, I worked a lot of cases where small children was murdered. That bothers you more than anything, or it did me. I had a small daughter at home. And that bothered me more than anything when you go to a crime scene or just like this, and you got small babies at 20-month-old, and kids that was in school, and grandkids. Their life was just starting. They never had a chance to enjoy anything in life. I don't know how you feel, and if you look at it, guns is not the problem in this country. You can lay any gun in the world down right there on that floor or on that table. That gun's not going to hurt a person. It's the person who picks it up. It's society is the problem with this country now. Society. People have no value for life anymore. No. And it's not going to get any better until things change. Anyway.
If you decide to get into law enforcement, you're not doing it for the money.
No. I'll guarantee you that. You're not getting.
You have to have a will to want to do this job.
I enjoy going to work every day.
I still do.
I enjoy it. I enjoyed the challenge. You go in and you work in cases. Don't get me wrong. We dealt with a lot of good people. I'm telling you. We dealt with a lot of good people.
He was in the county and I was in the city. There was no barrier there. If he needed help, I'd help him, regardless of where it was at. he'd do the same thing. All I'd have to do is, if he hurt, you want me to help you? I'd never turn down help. We helped one another, and that's the way we did back then. We still do to a degree. It's changed a little bit, but there was no barrier with him being a sheriff's deputy, and I was a city officer at the time. I was there. I was inside that home. I saw the carnage inside that house, knew the things that happened around there. When we saw what we had here, we, together as a group, went together up there to see if we could help them, offer assistance. We had to go do the trials on Ronald Gene Simmons' change of venue. They couldn't do it in Polk County because this is where all the homicides happened, and they afraid that Ronald Gene couldn't get a good chance of getting a fair trial. So we moved it to Franklin County. Clarksville and Franklin. Yeah, we had one at Clarksville, and moved another one in Franklin County. But the cases were moved to those courtrooms to trial.
Simmons' demeanor like in jail? He was quiet. You know, he let his beard grow, his hair grow. He never said a word. You could get him out and try to talk to him. Nothing. He was just, I mean, just like a knot on the law, more or less. He hurt the people he wanted to hurt. Yeah, and that was it. I mean, he never, to my knowledge, expressed a reason why he done it. The only way we was able to determine why he done it was from interviewing witnesses and stuff and running backgrounds, you know, and things that we had heard, and then even through school, the letters that we got that he had sent, his wife had sent her sister and things like that. That's how we was able to put a lot of the stuff together. Because he wouldn't tell us nothing.
There was a journalist on Channel 11, Ann Jansen. He was infatuated with her while he was down in the penitentiary. He was allowed to have color TV and cable. He was in death row in their single cell. He would see her on TV, and he got a message to her. He wanted to talk to her. Everybody was excited because here, Ronald Gene Simmons is going to tell her everything. And he even mentioned that he was infatuated with her. He watched her on TV, and he was infatuated and wanted her there. Well, a lot of people thought that, okay, Ann's going to get the scoop. This will be the ultimate thing as a journalist. I'm going to get to talk to the mass murderer and find out what was going on. And it never happened. He never told the story, period. He kept it to himself. We had a trooper that was just getting ready to bear down on him and shoot him because he was in that back room with that girl back there, kind of holding her hostage and making her make the phone call. That trooper, to this day, God rest his soul, and I've known Jerry for a long, long time, he was going to drop Ronald Gene Simmons.
He would have dropped him.
We'd not had to worry about it, but our chief, and I can say this now because he's long gone, but I'm still around. Chief stepped right in front of Jerry because Jerry was going to shoot through the plexiglass and drop Ronald Gene. And the chief stepped in front of him to go in there and get the gun. And he said a few back then, we had a chief that was kind of to the point, he didn't mince words, and reached up there and took it from him.
If he would have had if he had say a .357 or a .45, something like that, a bigger caliber gun, he probably would have killed himself. I mean, you know, good chance because, like I said, he knew he'd been shooting people and they hadn't died with a .22, and how many times he had shot his own daughter and them, and they lived through it with a .22. I think that's the reason. He's afraid he'd hurt himself, suffer, be a vegetable or whatever, and I think that's the reason.
And he didn't want that. He was not in control. I enjoy this job, and the reason why, I wake up every day not knowing what my day's going to be. I never know from one day to the next what I'm going to get. I can have 8 hours of nothing but boredom, but I can have 15 seconds of an adrenaline rush that you just can't describe. Okay? And when I do this job, I've done this job, I don't know anything else. And I'm here not because of the money, but I enjoy my job. We've taken a lot of y'all's time, but it was an enjoyable to be able to stand here and talk to y'all because not often do we get to talk about something like this. And I think it would be, if I was in your shoes, to be able to see someone who was still around to talk about something like this. I don't get to talk about it much. This is a good opportunity for me.